Something is running your life that you have never read about in any book. Not a belief, not a pattern, not a subconscious program in the way psychology describes it. Something deeper than all of those things. Right now, underneath this moment, underneath the thoughts you are having while you listen to this, a system is operating that has never once been reached by anything aimed at the conscious mind. Not by the books, not by the frameworks, not by the years of sincere effort and genuine desire for something different. It watched every intention you set, every decision you made to finally live differently, every moment of real clarity that felt like the turning point, and it continued running the original program without interruption, not because you failed, not because the principles were wrong, not because something is broken in you that more work will eventually fix, because nothing you tried was ever deep enough to reach it. Dolores Cannon spent 40 years finding the level where it lives. She was not building a philosophy. She was a hypnotherapist working with real people, people stuck in patterns that no amount of conscious effort could touch. When those people went deep enough, past the thinking, past the narratives, past every layer the conscious mind uses to explain and manage, something else came through. Something that did not carry the pattern. Something that had been holding, the entire time, exactly what the conscious mind had been searching for. That something is already inside you. It does not need more effort. It does not respond to more effort. It responds to something most people almost never offer it: the willingness to stop, completely, without agenda, and listen to what has been speaking underneath everything else the entire time. That is what the next 60 minutes are for. Not to give you something new, to show you what has always been there. Chapter 1. The Loop You Can't Break. Think about the last time you decided things were going to be different. Not a vague intention, a real decision. The kind that came with clarity and conviction, where something shifted internally and the path forward felt genuinely visible for the first time in a while. Maybe it was a relationship pattern you finally named, a financial habit you committed to breaking, a version of yourself you decided, with complete sincerity, to stop being. And for a while, it worked. Something changed. The behavior shifted. The pattern loosened its grip. There were days, maybe weeks, where the old way of operating genuinely felt like the past. And then, without any single dramatic moment of failure, it came back. Not all at once, quietly, through small decisions that each seemed reasonable in isolation, through the slow gravitational pull of something that felt less like a choice and more like a return to the only way things have ever actually been. And you were back where you started, with the added weight of having tried and returned. Most people interpret that cycle as a personal failing, a problem of willpower, of consistency, of not wanting it badly enough, or not working hard enough, or not finding the right method yet. So they try again, with more discipline this time, more structure, more accountability, more of everything the conscious mind knows how to apply when it decides something needs to change. And the loop continues. Not because the effort is not genuine, not because the desire is not real, because the effort is being applied to the wrong layer. Here is what Cannon's work reveals about that loop. The conscious mind made the decision to change. It meant it sincerely. It applied everything available to it: intention, discipline, new habits, new frameworks, new understanding of the pattern. But underneath that decision, something else was still running. A program that was never consulted, never reached by the books or the intentions or the years of sincere effort. A layer so far below the surface of conscious operation that no amount of willpower applied from above can touch it. That layer did not get the memo. It has never gotten the memo. And while the conscious mind is up there working hard on change, building new habits, monitoring behavior, congratulating itself on progress, the deeper system is running the original program without interruption. Not maliciously, not as resistance, simply because nothing has reached it yet. This is the thing that makes the loop so disorienting for people who are already awake. Because they can see it happening, they can watch themselves sliding back into the pattern in real time, with full awareness, with complete understanding of what is occurring, with every tool the conscious mind has developed to prevent exactly this, and still not be able to stop it. That experience, of knowing and still not being able to, is not a character flaw. It is diagnostic information. It is the system telling you, with complete clarity, that the level where the work is being done is not the level where the pattern lives. Cannon documented this from the inside. When her subjects went deep enough to reach the subconscious, what they found was not the pattern as the conscious mind understood it, not the story, not the behavior, not the psychological explanation that years of self-examination had produced. Something earlier than all of that. A decision made before consciousness was sophisticated enough to question it. A conclusion about the self, about what was safe, about what was possible, about what someone like them deserved or could expect, that had been running continuously since long before any book was read or any intention was set. The conscious mind had been trying to overwrite a program it did not know existed, with tools that could not reach the layer where the program was stored. That is why the loop does not break through effort. Not because effort is worthless, but because effort applied at the conscious level cannot reach the subconscious level where the pattern originates. It is like trying to fix the foundation of a building by rearranging the furniture. The furniture moves, the foundation does not. There is something worth sitting with here, not as a discouraging conclusion, but as the first genuinely useful piece of information about why the loop has persisted. It was never a motivation problem. It was never a discipline problem. It was a depth problem. The work was happening at the right altitude for conscious change and the wrong altitude for the kind of change that does not reverse itself 3 weeks later. Cannon spent 40 years learning how to reach the right altitude, not through force, not through more effort applied more consistently. Through the one movement, the conscious mind almost never makes a voluntary choice. Going quiet enough, long enough, to let what lives underneath finally surface. The loop does not break from above, it dissolves from below. And what lives below has been waiting, without urgency, without frustration, without any of the exhaustion carried by the conscious mind after years of trying, for exactly this moment. The moment the trying stops long enough for something else to begin. Chapter 2. Why trying harder makes it worse. There is a moment most people have experienced but never quite named. The deadline is approaching. The decision needs to be made. The solution has to arrive. Not eventually, not when conditions are right, but now. And so the mind accelerates, pushes harder, runs the same analysis from a new angle, then another, then another. And the harder it pushes, the less it finds. Not because the answer does not exist, because the pressure itself is creating interference, filling every available space with noise, with urgency, with the particular static of a mind that has convinced itself that stopping, even briefly, is the same as failing. Most people respond to that interference by trying harder. The loop tightens. This is not a productivity problem. It is a structural feature of how the two systems relate to each other, and understanding it changes everything about how to approach change, learning, and the kind of growth that actually holds. The conscious mind was built for problems that yield to pressure, calculations, logical sequences, tasks that can be broken into steps and worked through one at a time. Apply force, produce result. That is its domain, and within that domain, it is genuinely capable. But the subconscious operates on a completely different principle. Pressure does not accelerate it. Pressure silences it. Not because it shuts down under stress, but because the noise generated by a pressurized conscious mind drowns out the signal the subconscious is already transmitting. The answer was there. The trying made it impossible to hear. Cannon observed this in every session without exception. The subjects who reached the subconscious most easily were not the ones who tried hardest to get there. They were not the most disciplined, the most spiritually advanced, the most committed to the process. They were the ones who could let go most completely, who could release, even temporarily, even imperfectly, the need to control the direction of what was happening, who could tolerate the discomfort of not knowing what was coming without immediately filling that space with more effort, more analysis, more conscious intervention. The subconscious did not reward persistence. It responded to the absence of noise, the absence of urgency, the absence of the particular kind of mental activity that signals to the deeper system that the conscious mind is still insisting on being in charge. This creates a specific problem for people who have built their entire relationship with growth around effort. And most people who find their way to this kind of content have done exactly that. The bookshelves, the journals, the morning routines, the continuous investment in becoming more aware, more intentional, more aligned with the principles they have spent years studying. All of that is effort applied upward, toward more consciousness, more clarity, more deliberate operation of the thinking mind. None of it reaches down. And the pattern that lives down there watches all of it from a distance, unmoved, unaffected, continuing to run the original program with the same quiet consistency it has maintained since before the first book was ever opened. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from this, not physical tiredness, something more specific. The exhaustion of a person who has done everything right, by every measure the conscious mind knows how to apply, and still cannot close the gap between who they are working to become and who shows up when things get hard. That exhaustion is not weakness. It is the natural result of applying a finite resource, conscious effort, against an infinite opponent, a subconscious program that does not tire, does not doubt, and does not respond to any of the tools being used against it. The conscious mind will always lose that battle, not because it is weak, because it is fighting in the wrong direction. Cannon's subjects did not reach the subconscious by fighting toward it. They reached it by stopping, by allowing the conscious mind, with all its urgency and analysis and need to understand what was happening before it could trust the process, to become temporarily still. And in that stillness, without effort, without direction, without any of the striving that had preceded it, the deeper system spoke, clearly, completely, with a calm that had nothing to do with the subject's emotional state and everything to do with the nature of the system itself. The subconscious is not calm because conditions are favorable. It is calm because it has never been disturbed by the things that disturb the conscious mind. It does not experience urgency. It does not experience the pressure of time or the fear of failure or the particular anxiety of a person who has been trying to change for years and is beginning to wonder if change is actually possible for them. It simply holds what it holds and waits for the noise to thin enough that what it holds can surface. The hardest thing to accept in all of this, for anyone who has built their identity around the capacity to work hard and think clearly, is that the movement required here is not more, it is less. Not less commitment, not less desire, not less genuine investment in the outcome. Less noise, less of the continuous mental activity that feels like progress but functions as interference. Less of the pushing that signals to the deeper system that the conscious mind is still insisting on solving this alone. The willingness to stop, not as resignation but as a strategy, is not something the conscious mind arrives at easily, because stopping feels like losing. But the loop that continues through every attempt to break it through effort is not evidence that more effort is needed. It is evidence that effort was never the answer, and that somewhere below the exhaustion of all that trying, something has been waiting, patiently, without judgment, without any awareness of how long it has been, for the moment the trying finally stops. Chapter 3. The version of you that never got the memo. At some point in childhood, a conclusion was reached, not consciously, not through deliberation or choice or any process the thinking mind was involved in. Something happened, or kept happening, and the system that was running beneath the surface of a mind too young to question anything drew a conclusion about what was safe, what was possible, and what someone like you could reasonably expect from the world. That conclusion was not written down anywhere. It did not announce itself. It simply became the operating assumption underneath everything, the invisible filter through which every subsequent experience was interpreted, every decision was made, every relationship was navigated, every attempt at growth was unconsciously evaluated before the conscious mind ever had a chance to weigh in. It has been running continuously since then, not as memory, as architecture. This is the part that most self-development frameworks miss entirely. They address the behavior, the pattern, the conscious story the person tells about why they do what they do. They offer new frameworks, new language, new ways of understanding the pattern that feel genuinely illuminating because they are illuminating at the level the conscious mind can reach. But the conclusion that generated the pattern was not formed at that level. It was formed before language was sophisticated enough to question it, before the capacity for self-reflection existed, before there was any ability to evaluate whether the conclusion was accurate or simply the only interpretation available to a young mind trying to make sense of its environment. And it lives in the subconscious, not as a memory that can be retrieved and examined and reframed, but as a program that runs beneath the retrieval, beneath the examination, beneath every reframe the conscious mind has ever attempted. The books reached the story. The program is still running. Cannon encountered this in session after session, not always as trauma in the clinical sense, not always as dramatic early experience that obviously explains the adult pattern, sometimes as something quieter and harder to locate. A moment so ordinary that the conscious mind would never identify it as significant, a tone of voice heard repeatedly, an absence that became an expectation, a small, consistent message received so early and so continuously that it stopped registering as a message and became instead simply the truth about how things are. The subconscious held these moments not as past events, but as current instructions. Operate this way. Expect this. Stay within these limits. This is what is real. And the conscious mind, reading books, setting intentions, building morning routines, doing everything right, had no idea the instructions were still active. Because the instructions do not announce themselves, they simply produce the results they have always produced, in the relationships and decisions and patterns that the conscious mind keeps trying to change from above, while the program below continues undisturbed. There is a specific experience that belongs to this, the moment of inexplicable self-sabotage, not the kind that makes sense in retrospect, where a clear fear or a recognizable pattern can explain what happened. The other kind, where something was finally working, where the change that had been worked toward for months or years was actually manifesting, visibly, measurably, undeniably. And then something happened that made no conscious sense, a decision that contradicted everything being worked toward, a behavior that belonged to an older version of the self, one that had supposedly been understood, processed, moved past. A retreat from exactly the thing most wanted, at exactly the moment it became genuinely available. The conscious mind had no explanation, because the explanation was not at the conscious level. The subconscious had encountered something that contradicted its original conclusion about what was safe and possible and deserved. And it did what it was programmed to do. It returned to the baseline, to the familiar, to the operating instructions that were installed before there was any capacity to question whether they were accurate. Not as punishment, not as resistance, as protection, executing perfectly on behalf of a version of the self that no longer exists, but whose instructions are still in effect. Understanding this changes the relationship with that moment completely, not as failure, not as evidence that change is impossible or that something is fundamentally broken, as information. The sabotage is the subconscious showing exactly where the original program is still active, exactly which conclusion still needs to be reached, not by the conscious mind, which has already reached 100 more sophisticated conclusions about the same pattern, but by the deeper system that formed the original one. The conscious mind cannot talk its way past this. It has tried. The journals, the therapy, the frameworks, the years of self-examination, all of it has produced genuine understanding at the level where understanding is possible. But the program does not respond to understanding. It responds to something that reaches the level where it actually lives. Canon's subjects who reached the subconscious found something that most of them had not expected. Not judgment, not a catalogue of failures and patterns and programs to be corrected. Something that looked at the original conclusion, the one formed in childhood, the one that had been running beneath everything, and saw it not as a flaw in the person, but as the most reasonable response available to a young mind in a specific set of circumstances. The program was not wrong, given what it had to work with. It was simply never updated. A version of the self that formed before the capacity for choice existed, still making choices. A set of instructions written for a child, still directing an adult. An interpretation of reality formed in one context, still filtering every experience in a completely different one. The memo arrived, years of books and growth and genuine transformation at the conscious level. The subconscious never received it. That is the work. Not more understanding, not deeper analysis of the pattern or more sophisticated frameworks for explaining where it came from. Reaching the level where the original conclusion was formed and allowing something there to update, not through force, not through the imposition of new beliefs from above, but through the kind of contact with the deeper system that Canon spent 40 years learning how to facilitate. The version of you running the old program is not the enemy. It is the part that has been waiting longest for something to actually reach it, not another book read by the conscious mind, something that goes all the way down. Chapter 4. What your body knew before your mind caught up. There was a moment, specific, retrievable, somewhere in the recent or distant past, where the body said no before the mind had formed an opinion. Not a thought, not an analysis, something physical, a contraction in the chest, a heaviness that arrived without explanation, a sensation so clear and so immediate that it registered before a single word of reasoning had time to form. And then the mind caught up, and it had questions. Are you sure? Look at the evidence. Consider the circumstances. Think about what refusing this would cost. Think about what saying yes could produce. Be reasonable, be fair. Don't let a feeling override a rational assessment of the situation. And the body's answer got buried under everything the mind produced in the next 30 seconds. What happened after that is already known. The body is not a less sophisticated version of the mind. It is a different instrument entirely, one that receives information through a channel the conscious mind does not have access to and communicates through a language the conscious mind was never taught to read. Every tradition that has ever pointed toward deeper knowing understood this without exception. Not as metaphor, as operational reality. The body is where the subconscious makes first contact, not in the dramatic moments, not in crisis or peak experience, or the altered states Canon used in her sessions. In the ordinary moments, the meeting that feels wrong before anyone has said anything. The opportunity that looks perfect on paper and produces inexplicable resistance in the body. The relationship that the mind has justified completely and the body has never once relaxed into. The subconscious was speaking in all of those moments, through the only channel available when the conscious mind is too loud to hear anything else. Canon observed something consistent across thousands of sessions. Before her subjects could access the subconscious verbally, before the deeper system could be reached through language and direct questioning, the body responded first. physical sensations that arrived without conscious origin, heaviness in specific locations, warmth, resistance, a quality of ease that was unmistakable once someone stopped long enough to notice it. The body was not producing these sensations randomly. It was translating information from a system that does not operate in words, rendering into physical experience what the subconscious was registering about the situation, the person, the direction being considered. The subjects who learned to read those sensations before the conscious mind overrode them arrived at the subconscious faster than anyone who tried to think their way there, because they were already listening to the right system, through the only output it had available. Most people were taught the opposite, not explicitly, through the accumulated experience of living in environments where feelings were managed, overridden, explained away, or treated as obstacles to clear thinking, where being reasonable meant setting aside what was felt in favor of what could be defended logically, where the body's response to a situation was considered less reliable than the mind's analysis of the same situation, despite the fact that the body was processing the situation through a system operating at a depth the analysis could never reach. The result is a specific kind of disconnection, not dramatic, not the kind that requires a clinical explanation. The ordinary disconnection of someone who has become so practiced at overriding the body's signal that they no longer experience the signal clearly, who feels, in moments of decision, a kind of flatness where a response should be, because the response has been suppressed so consistently that it no longer rises with any urgency. The subconscious is still speaking. The channel has simply been trained into silence. Think about the decisions that turned out to be wrong. Not the ones where there was insufficient information, where the outcome could not have been predicted from what was available at the time. The other ones, where something was known before the decision was made, not suspected, not feared, known, in a way that preceded reasoning, that existed before the first justification was assembled, that was present and clear in the body at the exact moment the mind was building its case for why the opposite was true. That knowing was not anxiety. It was not the fear of change dressed up as intuition. It was the subconscious reading the situation at a depth the conscious mind cannot access, and transmitting its reading through the only channel that was available in that moment. The mind overrode it, and what the body knew turned out to be accurate. This matters not as a reason for regret, but as a recalibration, because the signal is still there, running beneath every decision currently being navigated, present in every situation currently being evaluated, transmitting through the body with the same consistency it has always transmitted, regardless of how many times it has been overridden, regardless of how thoroughly the conscious mind has trained itself to substitute analysis for reception. The subconscious does not stop speaking because it has not been listened to. It simply continues, patient, consistent, unaffected by the conscious mind's preference for information it can examine and defend and explain to other people. The recalibration is not complicated. It does not require a new practice or a new framework or a new understanding of how the body works. It requires something smaller and harder than any of those things. The willingness to pause before the mind assembles its case, before the justifications form, before the analysis produces a conclusion that feels more trustworthy than a physical sensation, and ask a different question. Not, what do I think about this? What does my body already know? That question does not replace reasoning. It precedes it. It gives the subconscious, which has been processing the situation at a depth reasoning cannot reach, the moment it needs to transmit what it already holds before the noise of conscious analysis drowns it out completely. Canon subjects did not learn to access the subconscious. They learned to stop blocking it. The body had been the doorway the entire time, not as a mystical concept, as a practical reality that had been operating continuously through every decision, every relationship, every moment where something was known before the mind caught up and overrode it. The knowing was never missing. The listening was. Chapter 5. The answer that was there the whole time. At some point, every person who has spent years searching arrives at the same moment. Not an answer, a question underneath all the other questions. What if everything needed was already here, and the searching itself was what made it impossible to find? That question feels dangerous the first time it arrives, because the searching has become identity. The books, the frameworks, the continuous investment in becoming more aware, all of it has built a self-image around the pursuit. Stopping feels like giving up, like accepting less than what is possible. But the question keeps returning, because the answers that have actually changed something, the real ones, the ones that produced shifts that held, never came from searching harder. They came from stopping. Think about the last genuine breakthrough. Not an insight accumulated gradually through study, the other kind, sudden, complete, arriving from nowhere identifiable. In the shower, in the space between sleeping and waking, in the middle of a conversation about something entirely unrelated. The conscious mind immediately constructed a narrative around it, connected it to something read last month, something processed last year, a logical progression that made the arrival feel earned rather than received. But underneath that narrative, something else was true. The answer existed before the search began. The subconscious had been holding it the entire time, processing beneath every hour of conscious effort, working underneath every night of sleep, present and complete, while the conscious mind was upstairs, exhausting itself looking for what was already downstairs. Canon documented this pattern without exception. Her subjects did not arrive at the subconscious knowledge through effort. They arrived through release, through the moment the conscious mind finally stopped insisting on being the one to find the answer and allowed something underneath to deliver what it had already been holding. What emerged in those moments was not retrieved. It was simply there. The way a word forgotten under pressure arrives the moment pressure lifts. The way a face unremembered through effort surfaces the instant attention moves elsewhere. The forgetting was never real. The answer was present the entire time. The effort was the only thing preventing access. This reframes the entire relationship with not knowing. Most people experience not knowing as a deficit, a gap to be filled through more research, more reflection, more deliberate accumulation of understanding. The discomfort of not knowing drives the search, and the search, as Canon's work makes clear, drives the answer further from reach. The subconscious does not experience not knowing. It holds what it holds continuously, without searching, without effort, without any awareness of the gap the conscious mind is experiencing so urgently. The gap is not real. It is the distance between the conscious mind's current position and the level where the answer already exists. Closing that distance does not require more movement upward. It requires less resistance downward. There is something practical in this that most people miss. The moments of genuine clarity in any person's life, the decisions that turned out to be right, the creative solutions that arrived fully formed, the understanding that appeared without process, all share a common condition. The conscious mind was not fully in charge. Something had loosened its grip. Sleep, physical exhaustion, distraction deep enough to pull attention completely away from the problem. A moment of beauty or laughter or ordinary experience absorbing enough that the search temporarily stopped. And in that gap, in the moment between effort and effort, the subconscious delivered what the searching could not find. Not as a reward for stopping, not as a system that withholds until conditions are met, simply as the natural result of interference being reduced enough for the signal to surface. The signal has never stopped transmitting. Every answer currently being searched for exists at the level the subconscious operates, complete, available, unaffected by the urgency being felt above it. Every creative solution, every right decision, every understanding that would close the gap between the current position and where things need to go. None of it is missing. All of it is beneath the noise of looking for it. That is the only shift this chapter is pointing toward. Not a technique, not a new relationship with effort or discipline, or the continuous pursuit of growth. A different relationship with the space between efforts. The walk is not a productivity strategy. Sleep is not just recovery. The moment of stillness that is not wasted time, but the only condition under which the deeper system can deliver what the conscious mind has been searching for in every direction except the right one. Down, not out, not forward, not through more. Down, to where the answer has been waiting since before the search began. Chapter 6. You're not starting from zero. There is an assumption underneath most self-development that nobody examines directly. That the person doing the work is incomplete. That growth is fundamentally additive. More knowledge, more awareness, more developed capacity, more refined understanding of the self and how to operate it effectively. The distance between the current version and the desired version is a gap to be filled through continuous accumulation. That assumption feels reasonable. It is also the source of a specific exhaustion that accumulates quietly over years of sincere effort. The exhaustion of someone who keeps adding and never feels full. Canon subjects arrived at something in the deep sessions that contradicted this assumption completely. Not as a comforting idea, as a direct encounter with a system that did not behave like an incomplete thing in the process of becoming whole. The subconscious did not present itself as a repository of potential waiting to be developed. It did not speak from a position of lack or incompleteness, or the sense that more was needed before something essential could be accessed. It spoke from fullness, from a position that had never experienced the deficit the conscious mind was so familiar with. It did not recognize the gap as real, because from where it operated, there was no gap. What the conscious mind had been working to build, the subconscious already was. Not as a future possibility, as the current reality is operating beneath every moment of effort directed toward achieving it. This is where the framework that most people are working inside begins to collapse. Because if the subconscious already holds what the conscious mind is working to become, if the awareness, the clarity, the capacity for genuine aligned action that years of development have been building toward already exists at a deeper level, then the project is not construction. It is an excavation. Not adding something that is not there, removing what is covering something that has always been there. That shift is not semantic. It changes the entire direction of the work. Think about the moments that felt most like the real version of the self. Not the peak experiences necessarily, not the dramatic breakthroughs or the moments of spiritual elevation that stand apart from ordinary life. The quieter ones. The conversation where something was said that felt completely true. Not constructed, not performed, not the result of thinking about how to communicate effectively, but simply what was there. The decision that was made without deliberation turned out to be exactly right. The moment of understanding another person that went deeper than anything they had shared, that arrived complete, without process, from somewhere that had nothing to do with analysis. Those moments did not feel like an achievement, they felt like recognition, like briefly becoming less obscured, like the noise thinned for a moment, and something underneath showed through that was more essentially the self than anything produced through effort. Canon would say that is exactly what happened. The subconscious surfaced briefly through a gap in the conscious mind's continuous activity, and what it revealed was not potential, it was already the case. Most people treat those moments as exceptions, glimpses of what might be possible with enough development. Evidence that the work is moving in the right direction. Encouragement to keep adding, keep growing, keep closing the gap. But the gap the conscious mind is trying to close from above already does not exist from below. The subconscious is not a future state. It is the current state of a system that has never been incomplete, running beneath every moment of effort directed toward becoming something it already is. This does not make the effort meaningless. It reorients it completely. The work is not building toward something absent. It is clear what is covering something present. Every genuine shift that has held, every change that did not reverse itself, every understanding that became embodied rather than just intellectual, happened not because something new was successfully added, but because something that was blocking the deeper system was temporarily reduced. The moments of real transformation were not construction. They were contacted. Brief, often unexpected contact with the level where what is being worked toward already exists, and always has. Canon did not find broken people in need of repair. She found complete systems operating beneath incomplete access. The difference matters, because a broken thing needs to be fixed from the outside. It needs someone or something to supply what is missing, to fill the gap, to provide what could not be generated internally. A complete system with blocked access needs something different. It needs the blocks to be reduced, not through more effort applied from above, but through the kind of contact with the deeper level that allows what is already there to surface through the interference that has been covering it. The search has never been for something absent. It has always been a return to something present before the first book was opened, before the first framework was adopted, before the first decision was made to become something different from what was already there, complete, functional, fully operational, beneath every layer of becoming that has accumulated on top of it. Not a destination, a depth, one that has never required arrival because it has never been left. Chapter 7. How to get out of your own way. Everything covered so far points toward a single, practical question. If the subconscious already holds what the conscious mind is searching for, if the pattern lives at a depth effort cannot reach, if the answer exists before the search begins, if the system underneath is already complete, then what is the actual movement required? Not philosophically, practically. What does a person do tomorrow morning differently? The honest answer is going to disappoint anyone looking for a 5-step protocol, because the movement required is not additive. Every protocol, every technique, every structured approach the conscious mind reaches for is another layer of doing, another form of effort applied from above, another signal sent to the deeper system that the conscious mind is still insisting on being in charge. The subconscious does not respond to protocols, it responds to their absence. This does not mean doing nothing. It means understanding the difference between two fundamentally different kinds of action. Action that comes from the conscious mind, pushing toward an outcome, driven by urgency, by the need to close the gap, by the continuous low-level anxiety of someone who has been working on themselves for years and is still not where they intended to be. And action that comes from below, that arises not from effort, but from alignment, not from pushing, but from allowing what the deeper system already knows to surface and direct what happens next. The first kind is exhausting and produces the loop. The second kind is what every person has experienced in their best moments and almost never knows how to return to deliberately. Canon did not teach her subjects a technique. She created conditions. Deep relaxation is not an end in itself, but a reduction of conscious interference, a quality of attention that was present without being directive. The absence of an agenda, not the pretense of no agenda, which the subconscious reads immediately, but the genuine release of the need to arrive anywhere specific. In those conditions, the subconscious spoke without being summoned, not because the conditions created it, but because the conditions stopped suppressing it. Every contemplative tradition that has ever existed arrived at the same understanding through a different door. Meditation, contemplative prayer, the Taoist concept of Wu Wei, action through non-action. The Zen instruction to stop seeking enlightenment as the prerequisite for enlightenment. The Hesychast tradition of interior silence. The Quaker practice of waiting. Different maps, different languages, different cultural containers, the same territory. A quality of inner stillness that is not passivity. That is, in fact, one of the most demanding things a conscious mind can be asked to produce, in which the deeper system can finally operate without interference. None of these traditions invented this territory. They discovered it independently because it was always there, because the subconscious has always been present beneath the noise of ordinary consciousness, and humans across every culture and every century have stumbled toward the same realization. The deepest knowing is not produced through effort. It is uncovered through the suspension of effort. There is a practical entry point that requires no tradition, no technique, no spiritual framework. It begins with a single, honest inventory. Not of what needs to change, the conscious mind has that list memorized, but of where, specifically, the noise is being generated. The continuous mental commentary that runs beneath every experience, the rehearsed conversations that never happen, the low-level planning that occupies the space between tasks, the habitual evaluation of whether things are going well or badly, whether progress is being made, whether the current moment measures up to where things should be. All of that is conscious mind activity. All of it generates interference. None of it is necessary in the volume it is being produced. Reducing that volume is not a meditation practice in the formal sense. It is a series of small decisions made throughout an ordinary day. The commute that becomes silence instead of input. The meal that is not accompanied by a screen. The problem that is written down and deliberately set aside. Not abandoned, but consciously handed to the deeper system, with the understanding that the conscious mind has contributed what it can, and the rest needs to come from below. The question held sincerely before sleep, not analyzed, not worked on, simply held, and then released into the processing that happens in the hours the conscious mind is not running. None of these are dramatic. None of them require the restructuring of an entire life. They are small reductions of interference, small moments of getting out of the way, that create the conditions under which the subconscious can begin to deliver what it has always held. The resistance to this is real and worth naming directly. Stopping feels unproductive. Silence feels like avoidance. The space between efforts feels like wasted time to a mind that has been trained to equate continuous activity with forward movement. That training is the interference, not a character flaw, not evidence that this approach will not work for a particular person. The expected response of a conscious mind that has been in charge for so long that the suggestion of relinquishing control, even briefly, even partially, registers as a threat rather than a relief. The subconscious has never needed the conscious mind to stop completely. It has been operating beneath every moment of continuous mental activity, producing what it produces, holding what it holds, waiting without urgency for the interference to thin enough that contact becomes possible. The gap between the current experience and that contact is not large. It is exactly the width of the noise currently being generated. Reduce the noise. Not permanently, not dramatically, not through the adoption of a new identity as someone who has transcended the ordinary operations of the conscious mind. Just enough that something underneath, which has never needed permission, never needed development, never needed anything except the temporary absence of what has been covering it, can finally surface into the experience of the person who has been searching for it everywhere, except the one place it has always been. Chapter 8. The single question that changes everything. After everything covered in this audio, most people arrive here expecting a conclusion, a synthesis, a final framework that organizes everything into something actionable and clear. Something the conscious mind can take away and apply. A new operating system to replace the old one. a method for accessing the subconscious reliably, a set of instructions for living differently starting tomorrow. That expectation is the last expression of the pattern this entire audio has been examining. The reach for more, the need to leave with something added, the assumption that the value of what has been heard will be determined by what the conscious mind can extract from it and put to use. The subconscious does not work that way, and arriving here with that expectation, however natural, however deeply conditioned, is worth noticing directly. There is only one question that matters coming out of this. Not what I learned, not what should I do differently, not how do I apply this to the specific patterns and problems currently being navigated. One question: what am I not hearing? That question does not point outward. It does not send the conscious mind in search of new information to fill a gap in understanding. It points down. It redirects attention from the surface, where the reading and the trying and the continuous effort to become something different have been happening, to the depth, where something has been operating without interruption, holding what it holds, speaking through the body and through the moments of unexpected clarity, and through the knowing that arrives before thought, waiting for exactly this. A person who is finally asking the right question, the shift from "what do I need to learn" to "what am I not hearing?" is not semantic. It reorganizes the entire relationship with growth, with change, with the gap that has persisted through every book and every framework and every sincere attempt to close it from above. What do I need to learn to position the person as incomplete, as a container that needs more added to it before something essential becomes possible? What am I not hearing positions the person as already full, as a signal being partially blocked, not by absence, but by interference, not by what is missing, but by what is covering what has always been there. One question drives the loop. The other dissolves it. This is where Canon's work arrives at its most practical point, not in the cosmological framework, not in the past lives or the between-life states, or the specific content of what the subconscious communicated across 40 years of sessions. In this, the subconscious is not a destination to be reached through sufficient development. It is a depth already present, already operational, already holding what the conscious mind has been searching for, already speaking through every channel available to it, while the conscious mind has been too busy searching to receive what was already being transmitted. The question, "What am I not hearing?" is the first genuine act of reception, the first moment the antenna stops generating its own noise long enough to pick up what has been broadcasting continuously beneath it. What changes after that question is not dramatic, not immediately, not in the way the conscious mind expects change to look, sudden, visible, measurable against the previous baseline. It is subtler than that, and more complete. The decision is made from a different place than usual. The pattern that simply does not activate in a situation where it always has before, not because it was overcome through effort, but because something underneath shifted in a way that made the old response unnecessary. The answer that arrives not at the end of a search, but in the moment the search stops. The recognition, quiet, unannounced, carrying none of the drama the conscious mind associates with breakthrough, that something has changed not at the surface, but at the level where change actually holds. None of that requires belief in Dolores Cannon's framework. It does not require acceptance of past lives, or the specific cosmology that emerged from her sessions, or any of the metaphysical architecture that her work produced. It requires only this: the honest acknowledgement that the approach used so far, the continuous addition of knowledge and framework and conscious effort applied from above, has a ceiling. And that beneath that ceiling, something has been operating that does not share the ceiling, that has never been shared, that has been present and functional and holding what the conscious mind has been reaching for through every book and every framework and every 2 a.m. conversation with itself about why things have not yet changed the way they need to change. The question is not a technique, It cannot be added to a morning routine and practiced for effectiveness. It is a reorientation, a fundamental shift in where attention goes when something needs to be understood, resolved, or changed. Not outward to a more information, not upward to a more sophisticated analysis. Down, to where the answer already is, to where it has always been, to where something has been waiting, without urgency, without the exhaustion of the search, without any awareness of how long the conscious mind has been looking in every direction except this one. For the moment, the question finally changes. Closing. This was never about learning something new. Dolores Cannon did not leave a technique, she left a mirror. 40 years, thousands of sessions, every continent, every kind of person, skeptical and believing, educated and not, spiritually advanced and completely new to any of this. What she found underneath all of them was the same. Not a broken system in need of repair, not an incomplete person requiring more development before something essential could be accessed. A complete system, fully operational, holding everything. The clarity, the knowing, the capacity for aligned action that years of conscious development had been working to produce, already present, already active, already transmitting through every channel available to it. Covered, not absent. Blocked, not missing. Speaking continuously into the interference generated by a conscious mind that was never taught that the answer was not somewhere it had not yet reached. It was somewhere it had never stopped being. The books were not wrong. The frameworks were not wrong. The years of sincere effort, the genuine desire for something different, the continuous investment in becoming more aware and more intentional and more aligned with what was understood to be possible. None of it was wrong. It was simply aimed at the wrong layer. Not because the layer it was aimed at does not matter, but because the layer it was aimed at is not where the pattern lives, not where the answer is held, not where the change that actually holds originates. That layer is deeper, and it does not require more to be added to it. It requires less to be placed between it and the surface. That is the only thing this audio has ever been pointing toward. Not a new belief system to adopt, not a new practice to maintain, not a new version of the same effort applied in a more sophisticated direction. A reduction of the noise, of the interference, of the continuous conscious activity that fills every available space with searching, that leaves no room for what is already present to surface into the experience of a person who has been looking for it everywhere except the one place it has never left. The subconscious does not need belief to function. It does not need understanding. It does not need the conscious mind to accept Cannon's framework, or validate her methodology, or resolve the question of whether any of this is metaphysically true. It has been functioning since before any of those questions existed. It will continue functioning regardless of what the conscious mind concludes about any of this. The only variable, the only thing that has ever been the variable, is whether the person above it becomes quiet enough, long enough, to receive what has been transmitting from below the entire time. That quietness is available right now, not as a future state to be worked toward, not as the reward for sufficient development or the result of finally getting something right. Right now, underneath this moment, beneath whatever the conscious mind is doing with what it has just heard, something is already there. It has always been there, and it has never once needed the search to find it, because it was never lost.